is the appearance portal going where no one has gone before. Welcome to the program tonight. I am Augusto Perez, and tonight we have a treat for you. My guest tonight is Gil Brazard, amateur astronomer and researcher. And we will be talking about a topic that a lot of people don't know much about and really are totally in the dark about, but very, very real, very interesting. Not many people talk about it, and that is Planet X, also known as Nibiru, Destroyer, Wormwood, and many other names. So tonight I want to welcome to the show Gil Brazard. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Augusta. And
well, if you could just share a bit with our listeners tonight, Brother Gil, what you know about your background, what brought you into this interest in this topic, and and some of these things to bring you where you are today.
Okay. Well, it started with a phone call. A friend of mine called me, and he asked me if Planet X was real and if it was biblical. And at the time, I told him that Planet X was not real, and that I'm pretty sure there wasn't any astronomical evidence for such a planet. And so after the conversation, I said, if I'm ever asked that again, I need to get the actual data together to be able to answer that properly. So I started to do a search, and I came across my own data in the Chinese records, and that kind of really started it all off. Yeah. And, actually found a white paper, a scientific white paper report called the Reevaluation of the Eastern and Western Records of the Supernova of 1054. And what that did was it proved that our assumptions that it was the supernova, that it ended up proving it wrong, that this object was actually moving through the night skies, as documented by the Chinese and the Korean and the Japanese astronomers. And so when I read the article, I decided to attempt to plot its orbit, because the data was they had done such a good job in stating where the object was, the brightness, the time, the year, the day, all of the criteria that we need to try to have a plot of this orbit. And they had multiple sightings of it within a 26-month period. And so out of that, what astounded me was that the plot of its orbit ended up matching the biblical parameters, where, like in Noah's flood, it says it's 150 days between the time that it started raining to the time the flood started to recede. Mm-hmm. And that's equal to the same time frame as in Revelation, where it says from CO6 to CO7 that they wish death for 5 months, but death will not come. Well, 5 months is equivalent to 150 days.
Wow.
And this object is plotted coming into the month of Passover and exiting, well, it comes in the end of August. It goes around the sun, and then it exits during the month of Passover. And that was quite astounding and shocking whenever you find actual white paper reports that match or mirrors a biblical event or an object that's occurring in the same way as the biblical accounts are. And so
yeah, that is very interesting. And I had read that several times, and I had never connected the dots between the event in Noah's days and the event in Revelation. That is the same amount of time, 5 months. And when you begin to connect these dots, it makes a whole world of sense. And it is fascinating in the sense that the Almighty uses these celestial events to bring about cataclysms on the earth, or maybe they come and the Lord uses them to bring about whatever ends He needs to bring about. And there is a misconception out there in the world, that God doesn't need Planet X, He doesn't need this, He doesn't need that, and that is true. He doesn't need, but He uses many times these celestial objects, and the Bible talks about how the Lord has given the celestial objects and the constellations as a sign,
sure,
for mankind here on planet Earth.
Well, you can take the story of Jonah.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever they asked Yeshua, when is this to be taking place, he said, the only sign that you will have would be the sign of Jonah. And there's only 2 pages to the story of Jonah. One was the 3 days in a whale, which Yeshua also used that one pertaining to how long will he be in the grave? 3 days and 3 nights, as in Jonah. But for his return, he says the only sign for a wicked nation will be the sign of Jonah. And when you read the second half, most people don't get the emphasis. It's more on what's not being said. Jonah convinced an entire town and its king to repent, but he didn't perform not a single miracle. How is that possible? Because the models show us that in 40 days, he said, your doom will come. The model shows us within 40 days, this planet is clearly in the view of Earth and is gaining in size as it's approaching Earth. That's what was, because they already, the people of Nineveh recognized the signs of the earthquakes, the birds dying, the fish dying, the same things that we're seeing today. They knew something was wrong. And when Jonah pointed to the sky and told them that this is your doom, that's why they believed it. And for Jonah to know that, well, God gave him the information as far as the timing and when to do this. You can see the fingerprint of God throughout this on the timing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is true. So, that is true, because he comes out of nowhere and starts telling them that Nineveh will be destroyed in 40 days. And
sure.
immediately they go into sackcloth and ashes mode and begin to repent. And so, yeah, absolutely. And then he spared them. He spared them. Mm-hmm.
But I don't think this nation is willing to do that at the moment. So
yeah, not at the moment.
Tough times coming.
Now, why do you call this planet 7X? I've seen that, and would you explain that to our audience tonight?
Yes, there is 2 main reasons. One is to separate the data on what's being said, like the 3,600-year orbit and many other false impressions on pertaining to this planet. I can prove this out later in our conversation. The second one is we happen to know approximately the size now. There's 3 ways of calculating the size according to the data that's given in the biblical accounts, as well as some of the Chinese accounts, and it roughly calculates between about 6.5 to 7.5 diameters of Earth. So I kind of took the average and I said 7. So I called it Planet 7X. At the same time, it helps to separate the data. When someone says something, where they're getting the information from, whether if it's the Samaritan text, Stitchin's work, or if it's someplace else on Earth, or if it's from the Chinese and the data that I've accumulated from the Bible. So that makes the distinction in the conversation as far as where the data is coming from.
Now, there is a very, very interesting, comment that you brought up, and we talked about this when we had an opportunity to chat on the phone for a while. And this is something that kind of separates you from some of the other Planet X researchers, and that is in the orbital time
right.
that it takes for this object to come by this area. It goes around the sun. It passes near planet Earth in our solar system, and then it goes back out into space. Now, I had always heard, and this comes from the Sitchin theory, 3,600 year plus or minus, and there are others that say maybe 2,000 years, 1,000 years. But according to what you have researched in the Scripture, and through other means that you have researched, other data, it's approximately 319 to 324 years that it takes for this orbit to be completed. Could you talk a bit about that?
Sure. For once, another point is that I'm the first one to get actual scientific data from the Chinese or anywhere that's actually verifiable in a model. Okay? This is not hearsay. This is from a scientific report that's been through the peer review. And they list it as an NEO, a near-Earth object. But when I plotted it, I found out that it was the biblical model, and this is going to be our Planet X. Now, if you go with 3,600-year orbit, and people say this was Noah's flood, well, you missed Noah's flood by over 700 years. So what event could have done if it's not Noah's flood? The Chinese saw this in 1054. That's less than 1,000 years ago. So how can it be 3,600 years?
Yeah, that always presented a problem to me.
Exactly. Once you start ironing out the problems, it narrows down the data to a reality. And what does it match in the real world instead of the make-believe? Now, you see, but what's common in reading ancient languages, anything over 1,000 years ago, zero did not exist. Zeros are implied in the text. That's left up to the interpreter to put as many zeros as he wish within reason on trying to estimate what they're trying to say. So Sitchin, when he read the clay tablets, what he literally read in the clay tablets was 6 times 6. Now, because of other data, they could tell the ancient Samaritans had a 60 unit of measure, 60. So he put the first number at 6, being 60. Then the next one, he said, on his memory alone, he's saying, it hasn't come through here before. So he dropped the number in there that it must be 60 times 60. Well, that gives you the 3,600-year orbit. But if you had left it at 60 times 6, he'd got 360-year orbit. It's through an assumption that it has not come through our solar system before that he went with 60 instead of 6. And that's how you get the 360, and that's been, everybody grabbed onto that. But there was no hard data because zeros did not exist. You have no information to plot its orbit. There's no documented, what I'm talking about evidence, I'm talking about what day, time, and place on Earth that it was seen, what constellation what rate of what direction of travel, what's the brightness of it, and was it by any known stars, and what angle from that known star. The only one to give us that type of detailed information is the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean records. Their astronomy goes back just a few hundred years after Noah's flood. That's how far their astronomy goes. Now, are they motivated on doing the work correctly? It was documented that two astronomers were caught at their post sleeping, and it was reported to the emperor. The emperor cut their heads off because he wanted reliable data of all comets and all happenings in the sky. Because it was, to them, it was a very real threat, because this comet changes the weather pattern. Well, this planet, when it gets close enough, it'll have a tail.
So it is like a planet comet, actually.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. It does not meet our present terms. This is going to be called a brand new object in a way. It does not meet the full definition of a planet, and it's too big for the known comets. So they'll have to come up with a whole new category. That's why there's plausible, it's a deniability by the politician to be politically correct. You ask them, what about this planet? They'll say, what planet? There is no planet approaching. Well, then if you say what comet, they still say none. They changed the definition of a planet in, I think it was 208 or 206, somewhere in there. Since then, unless you knew the new terms that they're going to use for it, you will not be able to corner them, because it's politically not correct, as far as the terms used. But this object does not meet the definition of what they define as a planet today. Now, what's interesting on that, they have a problem, because it says that one of the other cannot be a planet if it crosses another known planet's orbit. Well, this thing crosses Earth's path twice. So which one are they going to disqualify, Earth or it, as a planet? This thing is 7 times our diameter. They always give an excuse if it's smaller than and it crosses, therefore it cannot be. But this one's bigger. So they have a problem with their definition. They're going to have to change something. They have to add something for this object, because the data is different. The data, this is a brand new object that does not meet present definitions. And any astronomers out there, if they wish, if they were to get the white paper report, as I stated earlier, and they can plot it also. They can plot the orbital path of this and verify anything that I'm saying. I'll put all of the information on my YouTube channel, the calculations, the representative models of each one of these incidents. And there's an interesting saying there. Like someone is saying is, how do you define science? A lot of people say the Bible doesn't meet scientific principle. That's not true anymore, or maybe never has. I'm just saying that it does now. The answer for what science is was defined in astrophysics. It says if you can take a paranormal phenomenon into the laboratory and show that it's repeatable, there's a word for that. They call it science. Well, we have multiple eyewitness accounts that we can literally build models with now. And it proves out their comments that they experienced and witnessed. And that is impossible for the time period. They had no concept of Kepler's laws of planetary motion or the forces ruling the universe. For them to get this that accurate, and I hope I answered your question.
Could this be the same object that is referred to as Hercules? And
yes,
I believe there was a scientist named Ferrara from South America that he talked about it before anybody even heard about anything related to this object. And the interesting thing that I bring him up, and the reason I'm bringing him up is because he's the first one I ever heard call this object a planet comet.
He is the closest because he's using actual planetary physics.
Mm-hmm.
He's not using hearsay. He is trying to produce a model, but he was still lacking data to get his model accurate. But his claim of this being a comet planet, absolutely right on. He's the first one to do it, and he's absolutely correct. This is what the data is proving.
Yeah, this is definitely something we have never seen before. And now the question probably that a lot of people are asking out there, okay, that are listening to us tonight, the question they're probably asking is, well, if this object comes around every 319 through 20 through 324, around that orbital about 324 years, how come we haven't seen any destruction, let's say, in the last 400 years? We haven't heard of any destructions or any tidal waves of such, or any earth-shaking events that are recorded. How come we haven't seen that? So
well,
how would you
actually there is some events that are misrecorded. We just never labeled it to this coming through our solar system. See, if Earth, the only time it gets close to Earth, if Earth is in the position of the month of Passover, which is March or April, when it's made its round around the sun, and it's also in the month of March or April. That's when it comes close. That's when it's the most severe. And it's happened Earth has tilted in its orbit when it's passed, because it's like two magnets attracted to each other. The poles start to tilt. I have documented, I think, close to 4 times that Earth has tilted 26 to 28 degrees in its past. And
now, was this a gradual tilt? Gil, was this a gradual tilt or a sudden tilt when it last tilted?
There's no definite data, but through the models looking at it, we can do a rough approximation. It's between, the tilt would take anywhere from 3 to 5 hours coming in and another 3 to 5 hours going out. The tilt would reverse itself. Now, if you're 90 degrees from the axis of tilt, the wind's 90 degrees from that tilt, you're looking at approximately, I believe you're covering almost 2,000 miles of Earth's surface within 26 to 28 degrees. So you're looking anywhere from 500 mile an hour winds to 300 mile an hour winds. The Arctic Circle would reach Washington D.C. area. If 90 degrees to the tilt was the west coast of Greenland, from my last calculations, according to what Revelation is talking about, the pivot point is going to be around Jerusalem on its tilt. Therefore, 90 degrees from that tilt gives you the west coast of Greenland. And if it tilts 26, 28 degrees, you're looking at the Arctic Circle temporarily coming down as far as Washington, D.C. at 200 to 300 mile an hour winds, or maybe as high as 500. You're looking at things being flash frozen. Now, has that happened in the past? Yes. We found frozen mammoths with subtropical plants in their mouths, like daisies and such, that this mammoth did not even have time to swallow, and he was flash frozen.
Right. Yeah, I have read those events. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. There's been no explanation of it. Now we have one. We have the model that can prove this. Remember, what is science? You can bring a phenomenon into the laboratory and make a model and that proves it out and it's repeatable. That's science. We have one. This object is what's been doing this. This is what caused us the mini ice age, because Earth tilt changes. In other words, if it tilts 26 to 28 degrees, well, when it comes back, the continents have shifted some. The continents can be shifted as much as 7 to 14 degrees, according to the past records. Well, if you're 14 degrees closer, guess what? You got a mini ice age. That means the temperature of Canada is now in the mid area of the U.S. and vice versa, and so on. So
do you think
drastic changes
do you think, Gil, that
climate.
This may be? I just want to interrupt you quickly here. And do you think this is maybe what is going on right now with this Arctic blast of cold air that is coming down, and nobody has an explanation for this?
It's changing. Our magnetic north is moving at I forgot how many times greater. Let's see. I don't remember at the moment, but it's like 30, 40 times its normal speed, moving towards a little bit to the west of the North Pole, looking from the U.S., okay? And that's alarming. It's never did that. Well, we think it's never did it, but when you go back and check the records, when I checked where the magnetic fields have been in the past and their normal path where the magnetic north is, they've got it documented for almost 1,000 years. And I went back and I plotted where the years that I believe that this planet X has passed. And then I drew a circle around the North Pole pertaining to that to give me an average. This next year, we're inside that circle, meaning a high probability that it's near, because that's where it's been in the past. When it gets close to that area, that means this object is within a year or two of reaching it. And
that's very interesting.
Changing the magnetic fields or changing our jet stream. Mm-hmm. When it changes the jet streams, you got your climate that's way off, and that's why.
Well, even NASA scientists are now saying, Gil, that we are in the beginnings of a mini ice age, and that is the best they can come up with, but they don't tell us why or anything. They just say it's going to last for a few years. But I knew because I've been following this topic for a while, that this is being caused. This anomaly in the weather patterns is being caused by the approximation of this object that is beginning to enter our solar system. But of course, we are not going to be told that, are we?
No. And another pointer that you can go throughout history is look for 7-year periods of drought. It's throughout the Bible and it's through history, these major parts of drought. Like during the Dark Ages, this object is what starts this thing to occur. And you see major earthquakes that are misrecorded when the thing passes by. Now, if we're in winter at the time that it's passing through March, only thing we get visually is something about when you look at the night sky at night, if you know your stars and your planets, you can pick out Jupiter and you can pick out Venus quite easily, because they're the brightest objects in the sky. Jupiter is larger, but Venus is brighter. Well, at the maximum distance from it, as it's rounding the sun, what it would appear to us would be about equal to the size of Jupiter in a visual respect, but it's brighter than Venus. Okay, so it has been just another bright object in the sky it probably have a tail. So the Chinese described it as having a tail. Okay, and this is the same object that Constantine saw when it rounded the sun, and he said he saw a star in the sky. It was this object. The time frame
is the same object he saw. Wow, I had never heard anyone say that before, but that always stuck in the back of my head. What was it that Constantine saw? Because he definitely saw something.
Yes. Now, it was probably a few months prior to that battle that they got it labeled in. But that's the size of the object that they would have seen. Now, if you look at the time of Joshua and Joshua's battle, there's additional data that's found outside the Bible. It's in the Talmud. Not all the Talmud is correct, but it's not all wrong neither, because it has historical documentation of things that happened, okay? And it states during Joshua's time that him and his men saw an object in the sky 50 times the diameter of the moon. Well, this is one of the times that we can calculate the size, okay? If you put this object that I'm saying that's 7 times the diameter of Earth, roughly halfway between the moon and Earth, you have a representation of 50 to 1.
That's pretty big.
From a viewpoint of Earth. Right. This would also, if you back it up a few hours in its path. Now remember, the path of it is passing between the moon. Now the tail is not pointing in line with its path. The tail is pointing opposite of the sun. That's because it's a solar wind that's causing the tail. So now you have the tail pointed at Earth, wherein the path is taking it in front of Earth. Got it?
Right.
Can you picture that?
Sure.
Well, when that tail, when Earth is entering into the tail, the plasma field, remember this is clear. It's just a bright light, but it's Earth is going into the plasma field. Now that's stopping the natural energy from the sun going into our north and south pole, causing Earth to slow down in its rotation 4.5 to 5.5% per hour, compounded hourly. And guess what you have within about a little bit over 24 hours? You get the Earth to stop without mile-high tidal waves.
Wow.
Just like the accounts of Joshua says. I took this model, I showed it to a physics professor. He took a few minutes to study it, and this is his quote. He says, I'm the first one to explain this phenomenon logically, because the model works. Earth can slow down. There's 2 camps of theory on what is ruling the universe. The astronomers say gravity is ruling the planets. The physicists say it's electromagnetic in nature. The story of Joshua proves out that the universe is ruled by electromagnetic, not gravity. Because if it had been gravity ruled, it would have grabbed us and carried us out into a further orbit, and we would have froze to death. End of story. There'd been no more stories to write. Okay? If we have electromagnetic, guess what they would do? They would attract like 2 magnets. That's exactly what happens.
Right.
In the stories. We've had 2 or 3 times that Earth is tilted. One time is during the time of Joseph. Remember the 7 years of plenty, 7 years of drought?
Right.
This object comes about midway of the drought. You have 3.5 years drought coming in, 3.5 years drought as it leaves. Now, you may ask, how do I know that Earth tilted? From an artifact in Germany called the Nibiru disk.
Yeah, can you talk about it? Yeah, can you explain that a bit, Gil? Sure.
The Nibiru disk was an artifact that some grave robbers, I'll call that, but they weren't robbing a human grave, but they were robbing the site of ancient artifacts. They found this. It's I think a copper disc with gold leaf objects that represent the star patterns, as well as the moon and the sun, and the surrounding area, the horizons. And the copper is tarnished a nice green. And they were caught trying to sell this. I think it was in maybe Switzerland somewhere. And the authorities caught them, the Germans already caught, and the object was brought back, and now it's in a museum. Now, they had a few experts that tried to discern everything, and then I've read them, and I kind of disagree with some of their findings. Number one, they say the lower part of this disc is not the horizon in front. They make the claim that it's the Egyptian boat Styx that ferries the dead across the river. Well, I got a question. How did the Germans in mid of Europe ever go to Egypt to be able to get this information? And instead, when you go to Google, when you go to the site where the ancient Miss Observatory is, and look where they were looking at in the night sky, exactly in front of them is an old riverbed. They have a dam that closed off the riverbed. They had to reroute the river because of the dam, but if you put it where the old river is, that's exactly what was in front of the observer, which is at the base of the Nibiru disk. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, another thing that the experts missed was the moon, the illuminated side of the moon is facing the wrong direction. Illuminated side of the moon has to face towards the sun. So when they were looking at the moon, they said, well, with that shaped crescent, it was X amount of days old. Let's say the cycle of a moon is 29 and something days old. Well, they got that wrong, because now you got to reverse it 180 degrees. You know, it's either 3 days or it's 28 days, one of the two. Somewhere, so they had the wrong time frame they're looking for. And so that throws off the timing on when to estimate the years on when this thing was made. They had estimated it was outside the Bronze Age, and they thought that was so phenomenal that it was outside the Bronze Age, but it was not, because they were dating it wrong. Once I corrected the errors in it and opened the software and started looking for a date, it matched the same date as Joseph of Egypt.
Wow.
And that disc, on the bottom left corner, there's a constellation called Orion. In the month of Passover, which this disc frames the month because it has a constellation to the right and a constellation to the left there. Give me a moment and I'll find the what constellation that I'm talking about here. Give me one moment. I'll pull up some data here. And it's the constellation Gemini to the left and Capricorn to the right. Okay? Mm. Well, when Mr. Orion is seen from the bottom, you cannot see the constellation Mr. Orion from Germany during the time of March. Only way that you could do that is if the Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. The sun is shown there, but you can't see the stars with the sun. So the sun is shown as an eclipse. It's being darkened. The moon to the right tells you the moon was not involved with this eclipse. You can only have a new moon to eclipse the sun. If it's in a crescent shape, that means it's not a new moon, and it cannot be it's involved.
Now, let me ask you a question, because you mentioned a few things very, very, very interesting, and I have a couple of questions that I need to ask you. First of all, you mentioned Orion, and and I don't know if you're aware, but NASA has been trying to launch a shuttle type of craft. I don't even know what to call it. It's some kind of spacecraft, which they called Orion, and they couldn't do it, and they rescheduled. And this name is appearing very prominently now in a lot of places. There's a lot of interest in Orion, in the constellation Orion. Could this be because that is where this object is coming from? And the second question was, is there any idea who built this disk that you're referring to?
The disk, they can pretty much say that it was from the Nibiru colony, okay? And they had an ancient observatory there to where they could tell when the season started. So they were very in tune with the constellation and knowing when the year happened. When they plant the crops, when the harvest. That's why you have these ancient observatories. Because if you miss the planting season, your town could starve. It was very important at the time to better know when to plant and when to harvest, and that's what these things would help them with. What was your other question? Your first one, you said?
The other question is this other spacecraft that they are trying to launch named Orion, and it's not the first one I have seen with that name, and the project and so forth.
Sure.
And my question was, could that be because that is where this object, this planet X, 7X, is coming from?
Whether or not they're launching any equipment pertaining to this, I have no idea. But the general question is this planet coming towards or from the constellation, you see, Orion? And the answer is no, it's not. There is these assumptions that do not match data, okay? A lot of people say it's coming from the South Pole because the data they've heard, people say they took a picture of it from the south. So they look towards south. That's not the south of the universe, ladies and gentlemen. That's the south in the universe is around, when you look at the night skies in around July 6th or somewhere around there. Northern skies is around December, like 29th or so. When you're looking south, that's called Nadar. When you're looking straight north, that's called the zenith. So when they say it's coming from the south, you don't look from the South Pole. You look towards July at the nighttime skies of July, okay, which is around Sagittarius. This is the same area of space where they sent the Voyager and Pioneer probes in that constellation. What were they looking for? They stated in multiple articles they were looking for a new planet because the outer planets are perturbed by gravity that's telling them that there's another unfounded planet further out. And Pluto does not calculate to be the one doing the perturbing of the other planet. Its mass is too small. So they sent 3 satellites towards that direction. And around in 92, their instruments were able to triangulate their instruments that read gravity. The gravity instruments told them direction, height, and and area where it's at, to where they could triangulate. After that, NASA went silent on the whole subject of Planet X, and that's when they found it. Now, I estimated it was around 8 years or so outside of our solar system at the time. When it reaches Pluto, it takes 20 years to reach the sun, according to the models. Kepler's law of the planetary motion at roughly 360-year orbit, it's going to take 20 years to reach the sun. And that's roughly around this next year. 16 and 17 is going to be a very interesting year. That's why you've seen all of this elevated earthquakes, weather patterns, animal life, death, you name it. It's multiple of items out there that you can name that are all elevated beyond its norm.
And I totally agree. Now, you mentioned that this is not, the law that governs the planets is basically not one of gravity, but it is one of electromagnetic fields. Which brings me to a question, Gil. Could this be the reason why so many of these animals, which use their sense of north, of true north, like the dolphins, the whales, the birds, are dying in mass, and they don't seem to be able to find their way? I could say the same thing about the bees, although there's other theories out there about that. But could that be what is happening with these animals, that they're losing their sense of direction?
What I would, I have no laboratory proof about what I'm about to say, but this is my theory on what it is. We know that the Earth is going through. They have rock shifting. They release methane. The animals that you are seeing and the insects are acutely sensitive to methane.
Mm-hmm.
If methane is released and birds are flying through that cloud of methane, they drop right out of the sky, right instantly, right there, they're dead. Humans can tolerate it, but not these certain animals that you've seen. And when methane is released in the oceans, if a fish is swimming through it, they end up floating. They cannot handle the methane. And that's the major cause of death, because the rock structure, the layering is shifting on Earth, and that's causing the release of methane. And
that's true. That's true.
That's what we're seeing, because you can take the old story, which is a true story, about the coal miners. They used to carry I think it was a canary.
Mm-hmm.
In a
the
mine,
canary in the mine theory, yeah.
Because it always sang. Well, as soon as methane was present, that bird went quiet because he's dead at the bottom of the cage. And then they knew there was methane, because methane is odorless. You cannot smell it. Natural gas is methane, but they add a substance to it that has that smell of rotten eggs to it.
Right.
Otherwise, methane is odorless. You cannot smell it. Therefore, that's why they have to have this.
Of that, smell throughout the country and in other parts of the world as well. People smelling like what smell of rotten eggs, strong odors.
Sure. Well, this is also part of the reason why a lot of people are hearing these booming sounds and everything. The Earth is creaking and everything. We're in for some really phenomenal sights that are coming up. When this thing gets really close, when we start to go back through the tail again, you're going to see the aurora borealis go all the way down to the equator. And when that's super active, it hums like a trumpet when it's super active. You think there's trumpets going on.
Really?
And it's the aurora borealis going all the way down to the equator, because the tail is plasma. And what is the aurora? The aurora is when you have like a solar flare and plasma hits the Earth, it causes the aurora. Okay? Well, we're going to have a huge amount of plasma hitting the magnetic field of Earth. And you'll see it excited, and it's going to go, you're going to see extreme amount of colors and sounds.
I have actually heard those sounds of trumpets, Gil. Actually, I have heard it in the videos in the internet, but I also heard it in my home one day. And it was coming from the south, and it's that kind of sound that you can hear all around you. It's not coming from a specific place; it's coming from all around you, and the sound was like a screeching, kind of like a blowing of a horn type of very low rumbling sound, and that is what you're referring to, right?
That's it. You can go through all of the stories of the Bible, and I give a list of these. If you want to go through them, we can, real quick. And where they can find these objects, these stories that's lining up with the events of this passing object that's coming through our system, because it's documented in the Bible more than any other document, I believe.
Well, we can talk about that in the second hour. We got about maybe 3 minutes before the top of the hour. What I'm thinking is that this object, when it does appear, it's going to take up a big chunk of the sky. I mean, with the tail and the comet and everything, it's going to take up about a third of the sky by the time it comes across our view. That's going to
visually. Yeah, visually, there's kind of like a squaring ratio as it gets closer. I don't know, or a scale that's kind of logarithm. It's not, I don't know how to put it. Like when it gets halfway, it's double the size. Okay. So as it gets closer, when it's cutting that distance in half, it's going to double in visual size each time. Okay. So in other words, like when this object, if it's 7 times, when it's 7 days out, it's going to look about half the size of the moon. And if it's 2 days out, it will look at about 3.5 times the diameter of the moon.
Wow, that's
and
pretty large.
And whenever it crosses Earth path at the time, it's going to be in between Earth and moon again. You're looking at an object 50 times larger than the moon. And that the stories are not random in the Bible. The stories are giving us the details on what to expect actually for the end times to prepare us. And I didn't come to that realization till I processed all of the information.
Well, this is exactly why the Lord Yeshua said that the hearts of men would fail them for fear of things that are coming upon the earth. And at first I couldn't understand that, because there have been disasters many times on the earth, but this is going to be of such a magnitude, the likes of which mankind has never seen, at least our generation has never seen. Well, this is Augusto Perez with the Appearance Portal. After this short break, we'll be back with my guest, Gil Brossard. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is the Appearance Portal. You're listening tonight to an interview with my guest, Gil Brossard. This is Augusto Perez, and in the first hour, we were talking about Planet X and 7X, as Gil calls it, and very interesting things we were discussing in the first hour. In the second hour, we're going to be even talking about even some more interesting things, and I believe you are going to want to hear some of the things that Gil is going to be sharing. Now, we have with us also for the second hour our dear friend Larry Taylor. And Larry, are you with us?
Yes, I am, and thank you, Augusto. I've been listening the first hour and just extremely interesting information.
Well, praise God. Yeah, Gil has done an excellent job, and for those of you that are tuning in, we have posted on this page, on the program tonight, his book, and you can download it there. Also, you can check out his channel. It's posted
a free book,
there.
yeah.
And I strongly recommend and encourage that you do that. His slideshows are incredible. I've been looking at some of them, and you definitely want to check those out. And so, praise God. Now, is there a specific website or anything that you would like to share with our listeners tonight, Gil?
Yes, if they want to see some video representations of the models and the stories, and just go to my YouTube channel, just type in Planet 7X or my name, Gil Brossard, and you can actually see the information and the data that relates to a real model, that also the same overlay that the Chinese model has produced is the same overlay on all of these models, with the 150-year the 150-day separation between the entry and exit, and with this object on the planetary plane of Earth. And that's what's so shocking about the data.
Absolutely. Well, you want to make sure you go ahead and check that out. Now, at the end of the first hour, we started getting into some passages from Scripture, which make a lot of sense in reference to the previous passes near Earth of Planet X. Now, could you share some of these different times? And you mentioned several. You mentioned, King Sennacherib, the crucifixion, the Joshua's long day, King Sennacherib, and you have so many. The Tower of Babel. Could you talk about some of these and maybe shed some light on why do you believe this was based on your research produced by Planet X, the passing of Planet X?
Okay. Well, if we can go back to the first one, if you want, Noah's flood, we had touched on the subject that it was 150 days between the start of the flood and when the water started to recede. When an impact from a large meteorite hit the Earth, and 91% of our crust was knocked into space from the opposite side, it is, because crust at the time, and still is, crust is only held on by gravity because it's not glued on. That's why we have continental drift. And that went out, and that actually formed our moon. The volume of our moon is exactly what's missing as far as our missing continental crust. Therefore, the water could recede to the depression, which are our oceans today. And that model, again, proves out without violating any planetary laws. Then the next one after that is the Tower of Babel. And in the Talmud, again, gives us additional historical information on this event. It says that the top of the tower was burned, the lower part of the tower sank into the sand like liquefaction, just what we would expect. And the burning, I'm assuming that the burning was caused by a meteorite shower on the top. And it says only the center section is left for people to view. Well, if you go on Google Earth and look south of the ancient city of Baghdad, that's actually the mid-kingdom. If you look further south than that, that's where the old kingdom used to be during the time of this tower. And you see the outline of a square that is the base of the ancient ziggurat of Tower of Babel. And it has a moat around it, a water moat, because the base has sunken into the sand, leaving you this void to be filled up with water. So the data is checking out on this one. Then the next event after that was the time of Joseph of Egypt. 7 days of plenty, 7 days of drought. Remember Joseph's dream where he said that he saw the moon and he saw 12 stars bowing to him?
Right.
Or 11 stars, I think it was, or 12. I took that as Leo being the sign of 11 with another planet there, giving it a 12, okay? And he saw these things bowing to him. They moved, okay? We always thought that was just a dream that never came, per se, true, that it only represented the actual descendants, his son, which it can be interpreted. But with the Nibiru disk, I can prove that the skies did bow to him because Earth tilted. And when you're looking at the sky from the viewpoint of Earth, that's what it appears, that the moon and the stars bowed to him.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
And this is actually the first place that the moon is mentioned in the Hebrew Torah, not in the English translations.
Right.
Because many of the English translations, they have moed mistranslated as moon. Moed means appointed time, not moon. So
wow.
this is the actual place where moon is actually listed in Genesis 37:9. It actually uses the word moon there in the Hebrew. And so between the data of the Nibiru disk and this, we can piece the actual date and the year and the event. And the date was 1794, April 6th. That's what the astronomy software can point us to. And
well, you know, when you know these facts that you're sharing with us tonight, and then you read the Bible again, it just comes alive. You look at it from a totally different perspective.
Yes, it does. And during the same time, now Egypt's territory went all the way up to the southern area of what we call today Turkey. Okay, it followed the coastline through Israel all the way to the southern regions of Turkey, or Lebanon and Syria and all of that. That was their at that time they ruled the markets in those areas. Job was around that area. He was around Damascus area, around the Golan Heights, because that's where his son settled. Okay, if you read the story of Job, Job's trouble starts with a meteorite shower where his flock and his shepherds are destroyed. And the house that his children was in collapsed, killing all his children.
Right.
This was caused by us going through the tail of the debris of this planet. Okay? Now, it may have been further away that Earth didn't tilt right. Well, no, this is at the same time. I'm sorry. This is the same year and the same time frame as Joseph. That's we can piece this together in the story. And you see, what's interesting is you can look at how far Earth travels in 1 hour. Earth travels 8.4 Earth diameters in 1 hour in its orbital path. That's how fast Earth is moving. If you take the angle of March 26 on its approach to Earth's path of this orbit during that time, you come up with 52.5 degrees. Now, what's interesting, before I had an actual date for this next event, I was going with an average. I just took it in the middle of the month, and it gave me closer to 40 degrees, and that's how I came up with that it was roughly 7 times the diameter Earth. But with the date given in Revelation 12:1, gives us an actual date using astronomy. Guess what this calculates to now? 6.66 diameters of Earth. With the actual date that's given in Revelation 12:1. Now we'll touch more on that later. Now after Job's trouble comes Joshua's long day.
Right.
Okay. And Joshua's long day was roughly 355 years later, somewhere around there, around 14 in the 1400s BC time period. Well, if you read the story of what took place, the Earth slowed down to give him 12 hours longer daylight so he can finish off his enemy. Now, God told him the previous day to go and conquer his enemy that's 10 times larger than him. He only had 30,000 army was 300,000. And he said, don't worry, I will deliver them to you. Okay? He gets there in the morning. The army is frightened because the sun is delayed coming up. And he comes in charging, and they start to run. And he starts to slaughter them. Then a meteorite shower comes within the sight of his men and Joshua and annihilate more of the enemy than he did with a sword. Now, how accurate can a person be with a meteorite shower where you're in view of it and it's only your enemies that is being wiped out?
Smart rock.
And tell you ahead of time that this is going to happen.
Well,
and
the Lord is able to direct those rocks, isn't he?
Exactly. And he can tell you what's going to happen before it happens. He's the only one that's able to tell time, the future. And Earth traveled through the magnetosphere of this planet, and that's what caused the rotational delay of 4.5 to 5.5% per hour compounded hourly, and you get the Earth to stop, as it claims. The model proves this out. Then I think the Talmud says the meteorite shower happened between 2 to 3 hours later. Well, I have a chart that shows how far Earth travels in 2 to 3 hours if this object passed roughly half the distance between the moon, and this exactly calculates correctly for the beginning and the start of a meteorite shower.
Now, could this also have caused what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah? Because we know that there was definitely a rock or some type of a huge explosion that just wiped out that whole area there, not just Sodom and Gomorrah, but also other cities that are mentioned in the Bible. Was this also a result of the passing nearby of this celestial object at that time?
Now, this is where the data gets a little sketchy. My personal opinion, I believe it to be true. But there's a little bit of a conflict between the age of Abraham and and I'm finding out that if we go with the astronomical date, I believe that I can fit this in where Solomon and Mr. Gomorrah was at the same time as the Tower of Babel, but just in a different area. Tower of Babel was in Iraq. Solomon and Mr. Gomorrah was at the southern end of the Dead Sea, both being hit by meteorite showers at the same time. You see? And we know that Abraham left Babylon and traveled somewhere in Israel because he was fairly near Solomon and Miss Gomorrah to be able to rescue Lot. Remember how Lot, and he was warned by the angel to go over the mountain, that it was not safe in the valley. And he told him not to look back. His wife, there was 2 cities, not one. There was 2 that were destroyed. So when they got to the point where they were over the mountain, the first city goes up. The Lot's wife hears the explosion. So she turns around and goes around where she was protected and shielded from the rock. The rock was shielding her from the blast. She went around the rock, and at the same time, the second city was detonated, was going off. Any super large explosion like a meteorite, if you're close enough, you're vaporized. Just like it would be an atomic explosion, but it wasn't an atomic explosion, but it's like an atomic. She was vaporized. Right. Now, if you take a look at what happened in Nagasaki, there's people's shadows that are still there today on the cement wall where they used to stay because they were vaporized. This is what happened to Lot's wife. Her shadow was the only thing left. And the way that they wrote it, remember, it doesn't say God turned her to a pillar of salt. It's the observers that are writing on what they saw. She was turned to because they could see the perfect outline of her.
Right.
She was turned to because they had no explanation at the time. They didn't have a word like vaporization. They didn't even know what happened to her. They just saw the only thing left was a shadow, and that was probably her right there. Okay? That's how it's explained in the Bible, because you have to separate what God said happened and what the observer is witnessing.
Now,
they're only using the words that they have.
Do you think, Gil, that these ancient civilizations that built the pyramids, that built the Sphinx, which of course, it's pointing towards the belt of Orion. It's Orion's belt, and the Sphinx, basically, the face, the body of a lion and the face of a virgin, Virgo. Is this in somehow depicting or related to this object, the trajectory of this object, where it comes from, and how it comes in and out, and affects our celestial, our galaxy, our solar, system? Could this be maybe a warning sign, or maybe something that they used to kind of foretell how far this object was, from, how far away or how close it was?
Let me give you the planetary science version, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Once an object is in motion in space, its orbit, it's going to be stationary. It's going to always come in and out at the points of reference, Passover and the end of August. That's its entry and exit point. The third point is locked in at the sun. Things are pivoting. If it has a magnetic field, it's pivoting around the sun. Okay, so you have 3 fixed points now. That locks it in on Earth's orbital plane. Okay? Straight off the bat, we cannot be 4.6 billion years old with a planet that's playing Russian roulette, coming through here every 300 and something, because the odds are against us on being old. It's impossible. Secondly, the constellation Monsieur Orion is over 90 degrees away from viewing this entry point. Okay? You won't be able to see it matching up with Orion as if Earth was in the position prior to Passover, like maybe January, February. Looking at the daytime sky, when this object is coming around the sun, then you could line up the two. Now, keep in mind, you won't be able to see Monsieur Orion because it's the daytime sky. You'd have to do you'd have to be a trained astronomer or someone who knows stars to be able to know that it's there. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But that's about the only way that it can line up. See, the pyramids can't be as old as they say it is neither, because they're assuming the progression of the Earth's tilt, because the tilt of the Earth would make a total circle, something like 26,000 years. And they assume that is a constant, and it's not. We were thrown off by over 2 months during Noah's flood. Because when this thing came in, it says it was the second month. And the rate that the Hebrews held the month is it was in time with the harvest of a crop. That means your seasons were earlier. The orbit of the planet did not change. It still came in what we call today the month of March was still the month of March then. But the way Hebrew was telling time between the time of harvest gave him the time of Passover. And his seasons were earlier. The only way you can have that is the tilt of the earth was changed. And now it's later. Now it matches up what it is today. Passover and March are in line, and that's because the tilt of the earth changed. And we can see this. I can prove several times where Earth has changed, the continents have switched, and because it will cause these things to be off some. It's not a constant. Therefore, when you try to line up the pyramids with the stars of Orion, you have to back up the software so many thousands of years to make this work. They say the pyramids are older than Egyptians by several thousand years or something like that to make the lineup happen. But that's only if you use it as a constant that the progression is always the same. It wasn't. This object has disturbed that. So we don't know the real time that this lines up.
Right.
You see, it lined up with Orion, but we cannot say that it's X amount of thousand years earlier when it was built. We can't pinpoint the time the pyramids were built using the stars at that time. Cannot do it.
So basically, Gil, based on all the previous passages of this object, it's like you said, it's like a Russian roulette. It's like a shooting gallery. It is all about location. Where is the Earth?
Yes.
In relation to this object when it comes by. So apparently, these last passages that we talked about in relation to the Bible stories, the Earth was not that close when it came by, and there were some consequences, some asteroids, meteors hitting the Earth, and so forth, and some tilting of the Earth, but nothing really catastrophic that destroyed life like in the days of Noah. Now, there was a lot of talk during, of course, 2012 and 2013 about the Mayan calendar. I personally never thought there was going to happen anything at that time. The Lord didn't show me anything. I didn't feel anything. But could maybe the Mayans, could they maybe have plotted this thing scientifically, like by researching and doing all this research and found out that the next time that this object came by, it was going to be different, and they marked it as the end of this Mayan calendar. I mean, I don't have anything to go by here except God's feeling. But have you thought about this? Have you researched this? Have you formulated any kind of theory about this?
I have a theory that I don't have time to prove out thoroughly. Okay, so I'm just going to say this as a general statement, not a factual statement of any kind,
sure,
because I cannot prove it right now. I don't have the time. But if you take a look and examine the Mayan calendar and look at the outer rim, you'll see that it's representing a comet-like object. Mm-hmm. Multiple times. It's like, let me see, 1, 2, 3. About 20 times or so. It's represented on the outer rim. This calendar is an event calendar, not a yearly calendar or a civilization. It's an event calendar of every time this object came around. Remember how they have a long count and a short count?
Right.
Okay.
Decatones, yeah.
They got other counts also that they're not telling us about that I've looked out. And they can't make them fit, so they only brought to our attention the long and short count. But that's not what it's referring to. It's referring to how many days between the event, which you can calculate in years, each event that this object came by. In other words, if you take what's a Baktun, if you look up the actual Baktun, it's 394.26 years. Guess what? That adds up to it. Exactly when Constantine, remember we have a date when he had the battle?
Right.
In 112 A.D. Well, we know the Mayans had a severe drought and almost about 90% of the population died around the 700s. Well, if you calculate forward into time, the one Baktun, you get 707. That's exactly when the archaeologists saying they had the major drought. That's when this thing passed. Each unit of measure is the span of time between events. Wow. The Mayan calendar my theory is that it's an event calendar, documenting the span of time between each event. And that's why there's multiple periods of time that they're logging. It's been overlooked.
So So, in other words, what you're saying, Gil, it's a very interesting thing because I had never, thought about it that way or connected it. But the back tombs actually could be maybe like they said, the time for each celestial event, or roughly kind of if you will, a measuring stick that they had, like you said, not a timeline, but like an event calendar, basically stating, when these things were going to happen. And for some reason, their calendar just abruptly ends in the 2012.
That's the theory. Yeah, that is a theory. Right now, I have not been able to prove that because I only got one or two counts from them, and unless I read the original data, because reading the Mayan counting system is quite easy. It's not that difficult. And if I could go back, that's why I think they have to remake their calendar every 360 years and add another event to the outer perimeter. Okay? And so it's a misunderstanding. We have that often when reading ancient objects. We go with an assumption, okay, it's a calendar, now let's make it work for a yearly thing. What are they trying? No, it's an event calendar. Totally different. They were fascinated when this object's coming by because of the earthquakes, the droughts, the severity of it. They wanted to know so where they could prepare grain and water ahead of time, just like we would.
I have a question here from the chat room, Gil, that I'm going to ask you. It says, if the cornfield crops, that design that was made, the astral art, aligns with Planet X. Have you seen that, or have you looked into that?
Well, let me give you some information that's hard numbers, okay? That's hard you can't dispute on where the object is at. It's going to be pointing, it's going to come out of the constellation Sagittarius, okay? This is where the Voyager and Pioneer probes are. Look, there's 12 constellations on a planetary plane. Even if you would divide it in the vertical, another 12. What are the odds of it being the same constellation? Very high. Very high. So you got Voyager and Pioneer that went to that constellation. You got the biblical data that's pointing to that constellation. You got the Chinese data that's pointing to that constellation. You got a UL study that new gravity is affecting the orbits of comets in that exact region of space, confirmed by a London astronomer that confirmed these same findings of comets that is affected in that same space. You got 5 studies that point to the same. We got hard data here. Look, you can take clay tablets, you can take papyrus scrolls, you can take any type of data. If you can bring it into a laboratory and reproduce it as a model, show that it's repeatable, that's science. I'm sorry, but the way they interpreted the Sumerian text cannot be produced a proper model that matches history. The 3,600-year orbit and coming out from some other does not match the repeated data throughout history.
Larry, do you have a question?
Without the Chinese data, we could not verify this. Huh?
Larry, do you have a question for our guest?
Yeah, I find that very, very interesting, and I wanted to. I just saw a new post this morning that's very interesting. Let me read this real quick because it kind of goes along with a little bit of what he's saying. I got this off of the Quail Alerts. It says that there's an alert that came out from the Inuit elders regarding Earth's wobble, and they're reporting their sky has changed. And this is, they've also coordinated that with NASA. They say, this is what the Inuits are saying, that their sun doesn't rise where it used to, and their sun is higher in the sky, and their days are longer, and they're finding animal life with burns and on their bodies and dead animals, and also the sun, the stars, and the moon have changed where they are in the sky.
That's the first I've heard this, and I'm not able to confirm it. Now, I do know that if I put my telescope up and point it to the North Star, everything is still showing correctly. That the data that's in the telescope is matching, like, in other words, if Earth tilted and it was not, the 24 degrees tilt, whatever, then we would have a problem. And you'd see it in a telescope, in setting up a telescope. And I'm thinking that they, I'd have to look into it further. I can't answer you properly on that, except that I haven't found anything yet.
Okay, just one more question. Augusto brought up Hercobulus by B.M. Robileau, and also, he called it the Red Planet. Are you aware of the Coburn, so-called Coburn Bible, and or the Coburn ancient books that report about not only a planet, in other words, another planet, but also an entourage of a dead star? Do you know anything about that, or are you just talking about Planet X?
Well, that's why I called it Planet 7X, is to separate the data, because the Chinese model makes no mention of additional orbiting planets. And if you look at the Bible, if we had an object that came between the Earth and the Moon, and that the universe is ruled by electromagnetic, not gravity, I think that they would document it that it had other orbital. I think it's a misunderstanding of meteorites, or debris following it, but not actually moons per se. But time would tell. But I'm just saying, my data does not document. There's nothing in the data that I found that proves that out. Therefore, I can't say it.
Sure. What about a binary solar? In other words, our star also having a so-called twin, a binary universe.
That's another thing that doesn't prove out. Our closest star is 4.5 light years away. All right? If it needed another star to rotate, which you'd have to have an orbit way beyond 3,600 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hundreds of times larger, probably. And this object is proving out. Look, the last time we saw it was in 1054 with the data from the Chinese. It was seen before that, but it was, but not. It seemed like it's been censored during the Dark Ages, and when the Vatican had extreme power, and people had their own concerns on just trying to live during the plagues and the drought that they've had during those time periods. If you read the stories, it's very horrific time.
It's a bad time, yeah.
And right, so documenting this object in the star was not exactly a priority to them. And if it was, it would have probably been labeled as heresy, and they would have been confiscated, or you would have been hung, even trying to document this thing. It's a very strange period of time. So, but we do have we do have some plaques or carvings or paintings representing a couple of sightings. And what's interesting, they'll say this is Halley's because they'll show two comets in the sky. Well, they also show data in the painting of meteorite showers bombarding a town where buildings are coming. You can see the earth is shifting. You see trees are down. You see people are holding their stomach from sickness, whether it's drought or starvation or illness or what, or gas. It could be, some sort of gas that comes out of the ground. That's not done by Halley's Comet. There is no documentation because Halley's Comet, its orbit does not intersect Earth's planetary plane. Therefore, its debris cannot collide with Earth. It's impossible.
Well, let me bring up another really weird one here. You know where in the Bible it talks about the moon does not keep its place. In other words, it leaves its place of where it's supposed to be. Could this object somehow influence that event in the future?
Are you talking about Joel? Where Joel says?
Yeah.
Let me read it. Let me find it real quick here.
Oh no. Let's see. I think I believe in Isaiah it talks about it too.
Okay, well, there's one that's very, very common, and let's see here. Well, Joel says, I'm going to just paraphrase it. I don't have it in front of me.
Sure.
Joel states that he will make the sun will go down at noon, and he'll take what's normally called a day of brightness dark. We used to assume that used to be an eclipse, but that's not what it's describing now, because he would have stated that he would have darkened the sun. He didn't say he darkened the sun. He said he made the sun go down early by 6 hours or more.
Mm-hmm.
That's the rotation of the Earth.
Now, I think I found a scripture here that I think is what Larry's referring to in Isaiah 24:20. Isaiah 24:23 says, "Then the moon shall be confounded,
Yeah.
and the sun shall be ashamed." And then there's others where it says the moon shall be as the light of the sun. You know, in other words, the moon is going to intensify in light. And in Isaiah 13:10, he talks about the moon shall not cause her light to shine.
Okay.
So obviously there's going to be a lot of impact on the moon as far as, you know, it's going to act weird. I guess that's what you're trying to ask, Larry, right?
That's it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, let me give you the planetary physics version on this. Okay. You can only have a new moon create an eclipse of the sun. And that's when, if you look at a new moon, it's totally black in the sky. So if they're referring to both of these objects having an eclipse, it has to be a third object. Because the moon has to be away from its new moon position. Whether it's in full moon or, you know, a quarter of that or whatever, it has to be away from its new moon for you to even see a difference in the moon, for it to be eclipsed in reddish color. And for the sun to be eclipsed, so you're talking about a third object. This is the same thing that took place during Yeshua sacrifice. Remember the 3 hours of that they state that there was the eclipse for 3 hours?
Mm-hmm.
The sun and the moon went dark? Well, we have a problem here. Passover is on a full moon.